Once a year we designate a Sunday, Bible Story Sunday, and on that Sunday the children from the smallest to the tallest in their church school classes all learn and talk about one particular story out of the Bible. And it's already a custom that I also talk to the adults about the same story in the hope that some of you who are parents of these children may want to continue the discussion around the Sunday table. In any event, the story for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of Luke, the 14th chapter, and it begins at the 16th verse. Then Jesus said to him, "Someone gave a great dinner and invited many. At the time for the dinner, he sent his servant to say to those who'd been invited, 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a piece of land and I must go out and see it. Please accept my regrets.' Another said, 'I've bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm going to try them out. Please accept my regrets.' Another said, 'I've just been married and therefore I cannot come.' So the servant returned and reported this to his master, and then the owner of the house became angry and said to his servant, 'Go out at once into the streets and lanes of the town, bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame.' The servant then later said, 'Sir, what you've ordered has been done and we still have room.' Then the master said, 'Then go out into the roads and lanes and compel people to come in so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those who were invited will ever taste my banquet.'" Certainly one of the hardest things to learn in life, I think, is that we can get everything we want, dream of, and still end up even miserable. I suggest the evidence is all around us, especially among the successful and the prominent and the affluent. And yet for ourselves, we never quite believe it. We will be the exception. We still cling to the myth that if we can somehow achieve our dreams, see the fulfillment of all our desires, reach our life goals, then life will turn blissful and we will finally be content and at rest. What a seduction it is. A clipping I stumbled on going through some files in preparation for this service, which took on new light in the light of subsequent history, a clipping of an interview with O.J. Simpson long before his famous trial. He said to this interviewer, "You know, I sit in my house in Buffalo and sometimes I get so lonely and bored, it's unbelievable. Life has been so good to me. I've got a great wife, good kids, money, my own health, but I'm lonely and bored. I often wondered why so many rich people commit suicide. Money sure isn't a cure-all." Or another from the same file, a fellow you may not have known, but he was a well-known author some years ago, Ralph Barton, who wrote, "I've had very few difficulties in my life, many friends, great successes. I've moved from home to home, visited great countries all over the world, but I'm fed up with inventing devices to fill up 24 hours a day." Or there's Chuck Colson, whom I'm sure some of you are familiar with. He tells of a particular time in his life. "I'd arrived at everything I'd ever dreamed about as a kid. I was 41 years old, I had a healthy 6-figure law practice, clients waiting at the door, a yacht in Chesapeake Bay, a limousine and driver. I was a friend of the president, had all kinds of people working for me and others dying to get into my firm, and I never felt more rotten in all my life." Well-known interviewer out on the West Coast is asked, "Do you know of any superstars in athletics, music, entertainment, television industry, movies, who might be in danger of either deliberately or accidentally taking their own life?" After a moment's reflection, she answers, "I don't know of anyone who is famous in these fields who is not in danger, because I really don't know a single one who is content with life." Now, hopefully we have escaped. If so, let us be grateful and careful. Even if you and I have managed a bit of contentment with our lot in life, these sorry figures ought to stand as a warning of how tenuous it can be and of how slippery life is even in the midst of everything that we have, and how seductive alternatives can be. Does it surprise you that the biblical story warns us not so much against the obvious evils of life, but against the false gods that ever lurk in the shadows, seeking to entice us their way. If your heart turns away and you do not listen, and you are led on to bow down to other gods and worship them, I tell you this day, you will perish. And what were those gods? Well, back when those words were written 3,000 years ago, they were the powers of fertility, those dimensions of the natural world that were so important to survival, yet at the same time so devoid of any moral discipline or restraint. And I suspect we can look around at our society today and wonder whether these gods are not very much alive and in place, powerful and attractive. Is there not widespread addiction of various kinds? And addiction is just another word for idolatry. If not to the grosser gods, such as alcohol or cocaine, certainly to the sensual pleasures of comfort and leisure and self-indulgence. Listen to the commercials, have it your way, you deserve a break today. This certainly sounds to me like pretty heavy investment in my pleasure and satisfaction. And in fact, a lot of contemporary religion seems to focus more in that direction, on myself and my desires for spiritual comforts and pleasures. But this is not where Jesus comes out. With the Old Testament, he agrees that the fundamental human problem, our fundamental problem, is not gross violence and clear-cut depravity. We're all pretty nice people. But our fundamental problem is the tendency we all have throughout life to elevate to levels of ultimate investment and attachment of some good in our lives. Tells the story of the wealthy businessman who throws a banquet, sends out invitations well in advance, then reminders shortly before the day, as is the custom in the Semitic world even today. But the invited guests cannot make it. Why? Because they're off to rob banks? Not at all. Two of them have to tend to business affairs. Very understandable. One has to check out a major shopping center development, and the other has to test drive a new Mercedes he just purchased. And the third has to spend time with his new bride, of course. Now, what's going on here in this story? What's wrong with business commitments and family obligations? Well, nothing, absolutely nothing. And Jesus is not trying to turn us into a colony of monks. He's simply updating the Old Testament understanding of the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me and my banquet. So let me say it again. We all suffer from the tendency to elevate to a level of ultimate concern, emotional investment, ruling, obsession, good and important dimensions of our lives. Have you ever heard anybody say, his work is his life? Have you ever heard anybody say, he, she just lives for those kids? Now those are interesting expressions, and in a sense they're what Jesus is warning about. He's talking not about ordinary concern for family or business, but to the degree that these can become obsessive concerns, dictating how we shape our days, how we think, how we feel. A God is anything that rules, dominates, is the source of pervasive and destructive anxiety. That's a good test. We do it with our jobs, especially we who are professional or business people. We are so easily driven by our desire to be the best, successful, powerful, achieving, prominent. Even a few clergy can get infected with that desire. One of our news magazines describes a fast-rising businessman as self-described, larger than life, like a star athlete or a popular actor. There's no one who has accomplished more, he boasts. Life is a great game, and the ultimate scoreboard is obvious: money. Now that sounds dangerously like a perennial temptation to make money, finances, your portfolio, whatever it is, a kind of overwhelming preoccupation in your head. We all know the cliche, money does not buy happiness. Although as someone said, it will keep you in touch with your kids. But you know, it's easy in a money economy. It is easy in our kind of world to get caught up in the game. if not for money itself, then for the meaning that our work may symbolize, the approval, the sense of power, the feeling that we're winners in the game of life, so easily slips into first place in terms of time and thought and energy and emotional investment. If not, why are so many nearly destroyed by the stress of it all? If not, why do so many have incredible trouble with retirement? Feels like for a lot of us it tends at times to take on an absolutely crucial importance. In any event, Jesus warns against it. You cannot serve God and, of course we use the polite King James word mammon, but you know what it means. And he holds up family as another idol. How about that one? In this day when families under stress, in many cases disintegrating, may seem strange of Jesus to suggest that we become too devoted to our families, to the exclusion of other concerns and needs out there in the world, but nevertheless it remains a temptation and possibility. What do I mean? We can become so possessive of our relationships there, so focused there, so consumed with our worries there, that family really takes over in our lives. So what's wrong with this? Why does Jesus insist that neither business nor family must come first? Hard words. Because his little story says, when we elevate to number one status in our lives, any enterprise, any individual, money, family, health, whatever, we miss out on life. That's the banquet they miss. The ultimate fulfillment, the great contentment, happiness, salvation, everything that Simpson and Barton and Colson longed for but somehow never found. Now, how can this be? How can demanding too much of profession or family be wrong? Well, because in fact it corrupts our relationship with them and it asks of them something they really cannot deliver. Business or profession is a source of money and some measure of meaning, to be sure, why not? But when I load my world of work with the whole weight of my life, I turn it into a grim and all-encompassing activity in which I cease really to be effective and productive. Or to put it another way, I'm not convinced from what I've seen that the hard-driving, totally consumed individual is good for either his job or himself. And family is to be created and nurtured and experienced in a kind of freedom where others are not expected or pressured to fulfill my needs and make me happy, but are free to develop on their own. To expect your spouse to be the source of your happiness, you see, is to bring an expectation to him or her like that we bring to the gods. To him or her that will put the relationship under truly destructive strain. We can get so invested in our kids, even our grandchildren, that they become extensions of ourselves. They not only have to succeed for themselves, which every child wants to do, but they have to do it for us as well. And that's a terrible burden to carry around. My father or mother's self-image. Because if they fail us, they rob us of happiness and fulfillment. And our relationship with them ceases in that measure to be relaxed and free. At the age of 16, Ed Wynn, remember him? Decided to leave home and join a theater company. His father was appalled. A son of mine on the stage, I'll be disgraced, he wailed. What if the neighbors find out? I'll change my name, the young Wynn volunteered. Change your name, the father screamed. What if you're a success? How will the neighbors know you're my son? Well, all I'm talking about is the tendency we all have to make those closest to us somehow the answer to our happiness. We ask them to bear a burden greater than human beings can really bear, and we deprive them of the freedom to be their own person. This is what Khalil Gibran is poking at when he says, your children are not your children. They're the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. It corrupts our relationships to labor and love. It asks for something they cannot give. Idolatry does. And nothing is clear according to Jesus. Nothing in this world, not labor nor love, can finally make us happy and content and fulfilled. And to the degree that we still persist in seeking it there, in these, in things, in relationships, and what they can give to us, to that degree we will end up frustrated and empty and despondent in the end. So what's the banquet we're invited to, we're to find our way to? Well, it's Jesus' metaphor for what he also calls the kingdom. The banquet is a kingdom of love. It's a new ruling spirit that enables us to transcend ourselves and our needs and our happiness and even our purpose in life, to transcend all these and give ourselves to the larger world wherever life may take us, whatever life may give or take from us. Yes, even there in our profession and family. But this is a spirit of self-forgetfulness that rules and holds in check our other spirits, our other concerns, enables us to sit lighter and more grateful at desk and table, not so focused on demanding and possessing, but simply willing to go on as God, as Jesus, giving ourselves as long as God gives us life. For the real meaning in life, the gratification that comes, is that of transcending ourselves in the larger world. People of the banquet, you see, do not so much do different things as they do the same things with a different spirit. They're ruled by the Spirit of Jesus in their approach to family and friends and labor. And they also, as a consequence, do some different things as well, because the desire to care and serve out beyond myself is never confined or confining. It's always ready to go. It finds its delight and its meaning in being available wherever we are and whatever may confront us at work or home or beyond. Maybe that's why the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame are more likely to find their way to the table, to his Spirit. They've learned to expect less from the things and people of this world. And why does he call the kingdom a banquet? Because a banquet is what? It's joy in serving. It's celebration of giving. It's where life is. Fred Buechner, in his remarkable little autobiographical statement, The Sacred Journey, paints a picture, I think, of what the banquet is all about, and I can do no better than share with you how he describes it. After having given himself rather one-eyed and obsessively to his professional writing career, allowing it to dominate his life, he says one evening toward the end of his teaching career, he went to have dinner with his mother, who was living alone in New York City. It was to be just the two of us, and we both had looked forward to it, not simply as mother and son, but as two old friends who no longer seemed to be able to see each other all that much. Then, just as we were about to sit down to eat, the telephone rang, and it was for me. It was a friend with whom I had taught at Lawrenceville, and he'd not spoken more than a word or two on the phone when his voice broke, and I realized to my horror that he was weeping. His mother and father and a pregnant sister had been in an automobile accident on the West Coast, and it was uncertain whether any of them would live. He was at the airport waiting for a flight to take him out to them. "Could I come down, please," he asked, "and wait with him until the plane left?" My instinct in that moment was to be nothing so much as afraid. I was afraid of my friend's fears and of his tears. I was afraid of his faith, that I could somehow be a comfort and help to him, and afraid that I was not friend enough to be able. I was afraid of opening the door to his pain, or anybody's pain for that matter. So although I knew as well as anybody that I had no choice but to say that I would come, what I said instead, heaven help me, was that I would come if I possibly could, but there were some things I had to take care of first. Would he phone me back in about 10 minutes? In the other room, dinner was on the table, and my mother was waiting, and on that placid little stage there was played out a preposterous little scene that nonetheless was one of the watersheds in my life. Because when I told my mother what had happened and that I was probably going to have to leave and skip supper with her, her reaction caught me completely off guard. The whole thing was absurd, she said. My friend was a grown man. He had no business carrying on like a hysterical child. And what earthly good could I do anyway? It was outrageous to think of spoiling an evening together that we'd both been looking forward to for days. Problem was, everything she said was precisely what, at some level of my being, I had already been saying to myself. And so it was as much out of revulsion at myself as out of pity for my friend that I resolved, as soon as he called again, I would tell him I would come immediately. Then, as the final absurdity, when he did call again, he said that he'd gotten hold of himself and there was really no need for me to come at all, and the consequence was that I did not go. But in the long run, the consequences went much farther than that. The result of that phone call and of my response to it was the start of a long journey. A journey an old priest friend had referred to once when he said that I still had a long way to go in life. My mother's apartment, you see, by candlelight, was haven and home and shelter from everything in the world that seemed dangerous and a threat to my peace and happiness. And my friend's broken voice on the phone was a voice calling me out into a dangerous world, not simply for his sake, I suddenly saw, but also for my own. The shattering revelation of that moment was this: that true peace, the high and abiding peace that passes all understanding, is to be had not in retreat, but only in the thick of the battle of life. To journey for the sake of saving my own life is little by little to cease to live in any sense that really matters at all, even to ourselves, because it is only by journeying for the world's sake, even when the world bores and sickens and scares you half to death, that little by little we start to truly come alive. Now that is the banquet, or certainly the spirit of the banquet, and we who have so much can find our way there day by day over the years as we learn to let go of our demands of life a bit and of one another, and stay open to the needs and opportunities that fall our way, whether in home or labor or beyond. And then we can have everything, but in new and more carefree ways, and we can find even some rare adventures and needy places and even grateful strangers around God's table. Then we may truly savor the banquet which is life. Amen.